Mage Knight. Alright. That was a painful experience that I will never repeat. And by that I mean playing it with more than a couple characters solitaire. In fact, I suspect that playing a big multiplayer game of it is painful anyway. However, that said, as I mentioned in the intro, my wife and I played this addictively. Every single scenario, just about. There were a couple we skipped kind of accidentally. Some of them more than once. And the reason for that isn't because, oh, this was so much fun. It's because in the end, the game is, it's almost a challenge thrown down at you, right? You're sitting there, you've got this kind of neat, at least fitting the tastes of my wife definitely, and myself as well, in terms of the overall storyline, the thematic presentation, etc. You've got this kind of neat situation in front of you. And then it gets really hard. And you're like, the situation's enough to draw you in and say, I kind of want to try this. The gameplay is frustratingly difficult. Sometimes you're presented with, oh, no problem, I just go do this, and I do that, and I do this. But almost inevitably, there's going to be times where you're sitting there with, I ain't got the cards to do what I want to do, and now I got to figure out, what else I can do instead, what secondary options I have, or, do I want to just sit around and do nothing, throwing cards, using cards for minor effects, so that I can try to do what I really want to do right now, because if I don't do that right now, I'm going to pay a price later on. And just in terms of, because I'm spending cards to move around and get to other things, whatever. Usually you can set it up so you're like, okay, I'm okay for two different circumstances, although I'll tell you this much, in the two-player game, often there's only, with the tight wedge formation, which we didn't see when I was playing, often there's a situation where there's one path out that's decent, and that's it. So fairly often there's no path out that's particularly decent, especially as you added more tiles from the expansions. I didn't find that playing with randomly flipped tiles made it particularly better or worse. The tile positioning tended to be about on par with if you flip them randomly. Although flipping them randomly adds some extensibility to the game. So, what gives that addictive quality, and it's one that I don't know if either my wife or I actually enjoyed, although we enjoyed the time together, and this gave us a reason to be doing things together, the same way Dominion has, although Dominion was usually fun for us, although frustrating for her as well, for various reasons. And for me, in the sense of, well, we're always playing Dominion. With this, I felt like we were playing a different game each time, because there are enough different configuration scenarios, whatever, that we could, we could have explored this game for months longer before getting my fill of it. She got hers, I think. Let's see. So, one of the things I wanted to touch upon, and I'll go into components and such on in a little bit, but I want to make sure that I touch on it, is the comparison to Magic Realm. Because Magic Realm is the game that comes closest to this, or this comes closest to Magic Realm, out of everything I've experienced in terms of what it provides you with. And the reason for that is both games often require a significant amount of thought in terms of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to take advantage of the situation that I'm presented kind of randomly. Where I find this is stronger is the goal of the game. Like Talisman, like Wizard's Quest, like Wizards, I feel like I have a worthy goal to make a game out of. With Magic Realm, I feel like I'm playing careers, you know? I mean, I'm just kind of blundering around. My goals are so minor. It's to achieve, you know, my hidden victory conditions, which don't really influence the world. They're just, yeah, I want to collect so many hearts and so many stars and whatever. It just doesn't feel earth-shattering. In this one, I feel like my goal is I'm a commander under this somewhat evil kingdom that wants to conquer nearby territories that are, you know, in chaos, and they don't really care how evil I am. But I can gain advantages from either being evil and destroying monasteries and pillaging villages and such, not that I did any pillaging in villages, or I can follow a route where I'm trying to work more with the populace that's there and keep my reputation high enough that I can recruit more troops. Both are valid options and choices in the game, and you know, it kind of depends on what terrain you're handed as to which way you want to go. In both games, you have differences in the characters. In this one, I think the differences are far less severe. You've got a deck of cards where you've got, you know, only 2 cards that are different. You have some skills that are going to come along that are different, but basically all the characters start out pretty close to the same. And it's what they find, what skills they add, what spells they add to their deck that are going to make them at all different. The main place where your characters get differentiated is actually by how easy their path is, which sometimes has to do with who gets to choose the first card on the first turn of the game. Both games have a lot of randomness in the sense that, you know, you're exploring and you come up against terrain that doesn't go where you want to go, and they can provide, and they present you with choices that are just tough, where, okay, am I in a shitty place and do I spend effort backtracking to go back, or do I just take what's dealt to me, you know, by my random exploration and try to do the best with it. And in this one, almost always you want to take what's given to you and try to work with it. In Magic Realm, sometimes what's given to you is so terrible that you have to figure out some way to get around. Both games allow for character advancement in a certain sort of way. I feel that it's more decisive in Magic Realm, largely because the items and spells and such that you find can actually significantly change the power of your character. You can find one thing that you're able to use again and again and again that's just really potent. In this, because most of your character attributes are in cards that you get to use once per round, day or night, which is about equivalent to, say, once a week in Magic Realm, you kind of don't get as much from anything you find. But your deck does get more powerful. Where you do get a real increase in this game is from skills. The little skill chits that are usable once per turn, as opposed to per round, and the round turn thing is kind of important. While they're not as powerful as the once per round ones, on a singular use, allow you to say, use them in multiple combats, or if you have a need for, if you have a need for influence in combat, because say you have heroes or whatever, they allow you to use them in combats, and then also give you an ancillary effect at other times. It depends on how many combats you're going to have in a given round, but usually you have at least 2 or 3. So they tend to be a fairly it tends to be fairly useful to get the once per turn activities, things that allow you to convert mana, etc. This game presents you. Both games, like I said, give you give you situations where you have to kind of puzzle out what you're going to do. Both games give you situations where you might look and say, oh, it's easy, I do this, or oh, it's hard, I actually can't solve the problem. Not solving the problem in Magic Realm can result in your character's death, and then you have to start over, which isn't a big deal if it's early in the game necessarily, but it's a big deal later in the game. In this, failure has a consequence. You usually end up with a handful of wounds and such, not a no gain from it, but it doesn't really have it doesn't have the dramatic effect of knocking your character out of the game. Overall, I prefer what this presents to Magic Realm in a lot of ways. I feel like there's a smoother design to it. It's a little less random. There's just a number of things that please me more about this. Magic Realm, I find, though, gives me a hint towards something so much richer. If I could boost Magic Realm to a campaign game, where I had a worthy goal, and where, recruiting bunches of troops and following campaigns and such, campaigns are the biggest thing. If all that made sense, if all of it worked together well, then I would definitely prefer Magic Realm. I can play Magic Realm with multiple players solo, like 6 players or whatever, without it being a terrible problem. Playing this in 4 players, the decisions are just too tough. It's too hard. However, because it's so hard, cooperation becomes more interesting. Competition becomes more interesting. Competition in Magic Realm is usually just, we're both in the same area and I'm going to try to steal stuff before you get it. And then, oh, look, there's monsters coming. Can I run away before you do? Or else it's of a tremendously game-breaking variety, like the elf hides in the woods and shoots everybody on the only exit from the starting space, and takes all their stuff and cashes it in, and now is actually powerful. In this, it feels like there's a better model of competition now, a better representation of competition within the game, which is, it's not something you often, for example, you never saw anybody attack anybody, because the games aren't that great. You don't get all their shit. You maybe get an artifact if they have one. You may get you can push them out of a space that's important. You can throw a lot of wounds on them, but as long as you're playing the semi-co-op type version that I look at it as, which isn't specified in the rules at all, but if you're playing the semi-co-op where, yeah, it's better for us to win the game, I guess, but I don't come in first, then to come in first in a game where we don't succeed, or maybe at least equivalent. in that case, it's there's some reason not to just throw wounds on the other players. Because clearly, you know, if you have an advantage on someone, if you're playing with just a straight competitive game, well, if I've got an advantage on you, I had to mess your hand up for the next round. So we didn't really see any of that. The problem with this, though, is the story recedes. Although I say it's got this more dramatic, you know, story framework where you're conquering an area for your kingdom, you're spending so much effort on the thinking, because this one is just harder. You're constantly looking at, okay, next space, can I handle this? The next thing I want to do. No, I can't. All right. Does my hand just say I want to be doing this? Like, do I want to be going and recruiting troops? No, it doesn't. Now I've got this mixed hand. What do I do with it? You know, do I take an attack where I'm going to take a lot of wounds, but maybe get a partial success? Or do I try to do something else? And figuring out whether or not your hand actually is capable of handling a certain combat, especially if it's one of those close run things, sometimes that can be hellishly hard. I found it's very easy to cheat in this game, which is to say there are so many modifiers and factors you have to take into account in combat that you may just do something and miss by one and not notice it. Because you're not, you know, like, not taking into account the armor factor that a city gives, or something along those lines. And it's very easy not to put all those factors together correctly, just because it is complex to do. So it gives you this really hard moving puzzle, which I don't feel Magic Realm really gives you. Magic Realm gives you situations where you can look and say, wow, those guys are going to be really tough if they attack. Do I chance going into that space because they might show up, right? If you look at a stack of monsters, you can very easily say, they're going to whack the shit out of me. I don't want to face them. Or, oh, I can handle that. It might take a little bit of thought, but familiarity with the game makes it pretty easy to do. Here, I feel like I'm constantly calculating out my entire turn ahead of time, because I can see what monsters I'm facing. I know what points I have in my cards, but it takes me a significant amount of effort to figure out what I can do. And then, if I have a couple of choices of places I could fight, say, it becomes really hard, because now I have to figure out what will happen in this fight, what will happen in this fight, what will happen in this fight, each of which might take me 5-10 minutes to figure out. The hardest fights might take longer than that to figure out. And then when I actually go to fight the fight, I have to refigure it to make sure it's correct, that I got it correct. So there's a lot of effort, a lot of counting, a lot of... I'm going to say it's a certain kind of math, because it's kind of weird. You have all these relationships going on that are... you've got all these balls up in the air at once when you're trying to figure out what the hell to do. And that I find very, very, very frustrating. It's horrible to play 4-player solitaire, at least for me. And I tend to be able to keep a fair amount up in the air. It's designed to be played solo, though, as a 1-player game. And there's rules that'll, you know, make it so that it's not trivial, so that you're not able to control the pace of play. There's a dummy player who burns through his deck and gives you a time limit to make it a little more challenging. And because pacing is really important in this, okay? It's not a set pace like Magic Realm where, hey, you got this many turns to do things. Now in this, it's you've got until someone runs out of their deck, which becomes a very interesting challenge as you're facing someone else. When you're playing opposed, you can look and say, well, wow, they're burning through their deck. I have to do the same or I'm not going to get everything. I'm not going to be able to milk everything that I can out of this. You can usually, that pacing question becomes very important because you can usually do better the slower you take things. But every now and then you have to blow a whole hand to fight a combat that you really want to fight, which means that if one player does that and fights a good fight, well, now you may be forced to go at a pace you didn't desire to go to. Given the situation you're facing, you may need to maybe burn a few more cards and move a little further in one turn and not move as far overall across the board, or fight a battle you're not quite ready for and take some moves or whatever. So that becomes kind of an important factor. And anyway, the solo game tries to represent that same pacing by giving you this dummy player. And that's also in place in the pure co-op games, because again, the co-op, the players could decide as a whole how to kind of modulate their pace. They no longer want to use it as a weapon in a competitive situation. If you like that kind of deep thinking, juggling values, really tough and frustrating challenges, and that's what you want in a game, this is definitely a great game for that. For me, that frustration takes some of the pleasure out. I don't want it to be there as often as it is here, and honestly, I really kind of just don't want it to be there. It's too much effort to try to get a successful attack off when you've got a hard hand, when you've got a hand that doesn't, match what you're trying to do. It's just, it's too painful. But I can certainly see that some people would really love that challenge. All right, well, let's take a look at the components. So, across the expansions, there's a little bit of difference in the pieces, and in particular, the recent Shades of Tesla. The first game of it came out with counters that were a little different, and people really didn't like that. And I think the cards were a little different size too, and they re-released sort of a better version of it, I guess. And then I've got the second edition of it, so I've already got that fixed. But they did right by their people, by the players, by releasing that a patch for the original version, because apparently it was pretty badly differentiated. You got to kind of give them, their creds for that. But even with the original game, some of the monster counters, which I've got put away in here, and the cards have a different feel to them. Some of the monster counters, the cards are all fine in the original, but as you add expansions, the cards have different texture to them, which, that's pretty damn common to games with expansions. Most people sleeve their games. I don't. But for people who sleeve their games, it's not going to make a big deal at all. The counters do make a big deal. Some of them are, the bevel is different as to the front or back, and that allows you to kind of have some information about the counters. I don't know if they fixed all that. I know they gave some replacement counters that gave different values, etc. Because as the expansions came out, they changed some of the core rules a little bit. And the rules are kind of a nightmare. First of all, they're very tiny print, which can get tinier when they put them in these little tiny boxes. But also, the original game gave you a game walkthrough which the game makes no sense unless you read it, and it's not really a walkthrough. It's sort of a basic version of the rules, some of which, as far as I can tell, don't exist in the core rulebook. The core rulebook, which is meant to be more of a reference, is a horrible reference. It's very hard to find what you need in it, and it's also not terribly good for learning the game. So you kind of have to patch between these two to understand the whole game. This essentially refers into here in some ways, even though it's kind of, and that's okay, even though it's kind of the basic game. You can't actually complete a game of it without getting through this, I don't think. Maybe the intro scenario. But I know that I found myself having to refer to this for certain questions. Somebody made a couple of player aids here. I don't know how valuable they are. I didn't really look through these much, but they give more or less what's on the back here. But then as the expansions come, they retract some rules, change them. Lost Legion is particularly big at this, where basically, let's see. I mean, obviously they add some things, but then they have this detailed playing game concepts, which changes some of the core of the game. And it's very hard to see because, unlike, say, SFB, which did this, there's no real numbering system to allow you to convert in and piece things in easily and sort of paste together a rulebook. It's hard to find the particular cases that are different. But there's only a couple of major changes, so that's okay if you're addicted to it. It's not so good, and I'm sure it'll be very, very painful if I'm pulling this out in 2 years' time and say, hey, let's play again. And now there's a whole bunch that, you know, I'll vaguely remember, but it'll be hard to pull together. Well, crystals changed over the eras. That's not too big a deal for play value, but it's kind of an aesthetically ugly thing. I feel some of the characters are more powerful than others, or some of them are more powerful situationally, at least. So, for example, the elf is great if there's recruiting opportunities early in the game, but if there isn't, and like I said, you know, the characters aren't too differentiated, but his skills aim towards recruiting troops and getting more troops. So it might be more important, you know, what the board situation is and what unfolds randomly in front of him. But looking at a particular board situation, he might not be a great choice if there aren't any recruiting opportunities early. And that's one of the neat things you do, is you set up the game before you, at least according to the basic situation. You could just deal characters out. There are different ways to configure this. But you set up the board, and then you look and decide which character you want to play after randomly, you know, after deciding. Basically, the way my wife and I would play it is we'd randomly decide who gets first pick. And first pick is either I get first pick out of the card pile, or I get first pick of characters. And then the other person gets the other thing. So you can look at the board and kind of say, well, there's recruiting opportunities and I like the elf, I'll take him, you know. Or there's no recruiting opportunities, even though I like the elf, I'm going to pick something else. This Druid guy has some good movement capabilities, which can be pretty good if the board sucks, but he doesn't, his combat abilities, his skills are not as strong as some of the others. The dragon has nice capabilities with mana and magic. This chick has some capabilities that revolve around being able to use wounds, which is very cool. She's also good with combat. Let's see. Who do we have here? This is my wife's favorite character. He's just sort of a pure combat character. And he's fairly strong at that. Krang. Krang is weird. Krang is sort of a muddling of a lot of things. He has some abilities that help him with recruiting if he's been evil. Like he has his disguise. He's this giant orc type thing or something. But, you know, he puts on a fake mustache and people don't know who he is. Which I think is kind of cool. I actually like him. He's got a nice mixture. Low on magic. I don't know what to say about this chick. She's the newest character, the newest expansion character. Combat and movement, kind of. But I have not played her much and haven't been too happy with her. I haven't played the Druid much either, and I'm not on. No, she can. I'm trying to think. She might be Lost Reach. Anyway, I didn't find her particularly useful in general. You have a lot of configurations for the game, and that's a big deal. So, even with the base game, it gives you, I don't know how many scenarios. Let's see. It gives you a big handful. So the reconnaissance, that's the intro scenario. Conquest. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it gives you 7 different scenarios, most of which have a speedier version, the Blitz version, which is kind of cool because it allows you to advance your character more quickly and you start off with more. So you don't get hosed quite the same way at the beginning. Or there's not the opportunity for that, but it's harder to recover if you do end up in a bad situation, because there's not as much time to play that out. Most of them have a Blitz version. They have cooperation versions, which may be Blitz in full versions of it. They have different goals. So some of them are the city conquest. Some of them, there's a mines liberation, where the goal is really to take. You have to fight things that are sitting on top of the mines, and they become more dependent. You're able to get crystals more rapidly from those. There's ones where you go after the glades, which also have their own little advantages when you get it. There's ones that are all about going out and adventuring in the dungeons and such, and they make that more important. One that I didn't play with my wife, or at all, is a very long one. It's actually, no, it's only 6 rounds. But the goal for this one is to conquer things and then hold on to them. And it doesn't have a sudden death in it. Most of them have sort of a sudden death. Once you reach the victory conditions, you get dropped. You get dropped into, hey, this is the final turn of the game. Everybody gets one more turn. One to return is you play. Let's see. The scenario ends as soon as the second night is over. We haven't done this one either. Whoever stands at the portal space at that moment wins the game. So what you want to do is get strong enough that you can push the other guy out of the portal on that last turn of the game. So it gives you a quick, run out, do things, and come back, and you're the only one who makes it. That sounds like the most competitive of them all, because it's probably going to end in a bit of combat at the end of the game. But you want to weaken the other guy. That one doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. Not because it's so competitive, per se, but because I think what happens is you just try to screw the other player right from the beginning. That's really all your goal is to screw the other player. As you can see with all the expansions, and I don't have all the expansion boxes in here, it pretty much fills the box, which means if they come out with anything more, there ain't going to be room, because I'm already stuffed beyond what I can fit. Overall, value for money, even though I didn't enjoy it all that much, in the, hey, this was a lot of fun, the addictive quality gives you something. It's what I get out of video games, I guess, is this, okay, we're going to do this because we have to do this. I had this out of Republic of Rome. That was a game that definitely had this feel where, oh man, the non-player characters were so shitty and so evil in Republic of Rome, and we're trying, they're trying to pad their own nest or do whatever the hell they want to do. And it makes it very hard for one player, certainly, but two players to keep Rome alive throughout that period. And likewise, another one that had an addictive quality for a group that I played in, without necessarily being a lot of fun, was Hammer of Thor. Someday I'll play that. But there, I feel like the addictive quality is, can this game be any fun? Or is there something we can do to fix this game? That was a really weird situation. But then the addiction for this, of trying to, challenge the game, was similar to the difficulty of dealing with Republic of Rome. The difference here was, very quickly we got to a point where, yeah, it's clear we can beat the scenario as written. Of course, you can keep dialing it up and making it harder. And that's the thing, is that you have so much configuration that we could have kept going for quite a long time playing this just on the, let's just keep making it harder. Let's see if we can beat it at a harder level. Let's play co-op at a harder level, or let's play competitive at a harder level, or whatever. Then you have the addition of the expansions. So the Volcare expansions give you this mobile thing in one case. Well, in all cases it's mobile. This mobile thing that you have to defeat, and it's pretty damn hard to beat. One player might be able to do it in enough time, but usually what we found, well, first of all, the victory points are dependent on that, or at least that's a heavy victory point source. So even if one player goes in and starts hitting it, the other player probably wants to get in on the action and score some points as well. Particularly painful is the one where he rushes for the portal, because you're on a time limit. We weren't able to beat that one, actually. I think we only played it once, but I wanted to go back and try to beat it again. But those are pure co-op, and as such, that kind of takes some of the flavor out of the game. I'd rather have the co-op competitive combined. But, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, because it's pretty clear who's kind of more powerful, even in a pure co-op. So one person gets the edge, and it's pretty clear they've won at some point in the game. Almost always, at least when I play with my wife. And it's not always me. It's not always me. I mean, she's won as well. It's usually pretty skewed, and it's pretty clear one person overall has just got a more kick-ass character. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I got my money's worth out of it, just in terms of the play, the challenge, the time together, whatever. I respect the game, but I don't think I like it terribly much. It just doesn't fit my play style very well. On the other hand, it does definitely present you with this really nice kind of mobile puzzle. It's a puzzle game in the sense that you're constantly looking at your hand, trying to figure out how to solve the current problem on your plate. In general, it's not really a game where you have a big long-term strategy, at least after you've played it a little bit, because basically you can look at it and say, okay, well, the situation says that I want to recruit troops, or the situation says I want to grab, this potent advanced ability because I really like the way that one works, and it'll work well with this board. But a lot of it's very much opportunistic. I can do this now, I'll do it. And just this sort of slow progression or steady progression. And where it gets really frustrating is when you can't progress anymore. When you get blocked like I did in my game that I played. And that's just very, very painful. For me, it takes enough of the fun away that I just would rather not be doing it for the most part. Even though the challenge of it does have that addictive quality for me. But, for other people, hey, if juggling, the balance of things out there, kind of like in Bazaar, where you're juggling this kind of math problem of conversions. But this is different. This you're juggling up in your mind, what things can I do? It's usually pretty obvious what you'd most want to do. What's not obvious is whether or not you can do it. And that's what I don't like. I would rather be faced with, okay, is this general strategy better or is this general strategy better? And I can't tell. But when it comes down to the mechanical aspects of actually implementing it, that shouldn't be too hard for me. And this reverses that situation. And I find it intriguing and compelling, but not a lot of fun. All right, let's send it up.